Welcome to 2024. I feel very humbled and grateful that I get to start sort of officially my year, Riders and Elephants year, with you all in this Emotions at Work Learning Lab event. Our special guest today, which I feel really proud to introduce you to all, is Assistant Professor Michael Parke, and he hails from the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. We just caught up briefly here. He knows Jacob Levitt, who many of you met at a previous event we ran, and he also worked previously alongside or with Sigal Bassad. Anyone knows her work well, which is really exciting. He has a PhD in organizational behavior and a background in management consulting and startups. He's a dedicated researcher, educator. He teaches a course on teamwork and leadership. He's also a father of two, so understands, like myself, how rewarding but also hectic holidays can be with two young kids. His latest research is putting feelings into words, how voicing affect labeling of negative emotions influences voice endorsement. And I really cannot wait today to dive further into Michael's research, because anyone who makes a living out of challenging conventional wisdom is someone I want to get to know better. As many of you know, rebellious is there or thereabouts in the top 5 or 6 things I want to feel in my work. I need to feel in my work to be successful. And from what I gather so far, which we'll learn much more about in the next hour, Michael's work does just that. When I stumble across research, interviews, but especially research that has evidence and stories that challenge conventional wisdom, in this case, the conventional wisdom that talking about negative emotions at work is harmful, that many of you will have come across. I know that's a question we get in our work, Michael, is I don't want to talk about the white cards, which is the unpleasant feelings. Anybody who challenges conventional wisdom in this way, I think should be a friend of ours. So Michael, thank you very much for coming in.
Yeah, thank you.
Our community.
Thank you. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And if you're curious of my 2 little girls' ages, one just turned 5 yesterday and the other's 2. So we're having lots of fun. I get to practice these emotional intelligent conversations every day, multiple times a day, and usually fail at them as well. So a lot to learn from. And my wife and I hold each other accountable. So like maybe that wasn't the best approach to dealing with our 5-year-old's tantrum right there. So I'm amazed after having children how much of the best practices of parenting also can be used in the workplace dealing with adults. So that's always nice too. But anyway, thanks so much for inviting me out. I can't wait to talk with you all about this important topic.
Yeah, beautiful. And so what we've got today, guys, is I've got about 10 questions that we're going to work through with Michael. And then if you could hold all your questions to the end, hopefully we'll have time. It depends on what sort of tangents we go on in the next 45 minutes. We'll open the floor at the end if we've got time to questions. But I wanted to start straight into that point about this conventional wisdom that people might have, that talking about negative emotions, we shouldn't be doing it at workplace. But your research challenges that idea a lot, Michael. And how does talking about negative feelings actually help us?
Yeah, so I could speak a lot about that, but why don't I kind of focus in on one particular paper and project we're really excited about that we're calling affect labeling, voice or affect labeling. And so when I first was introduced to the concept of affect labeling, I'm like, I have to do a paper on this. So for those of you less familiar with that term, basically what it means is putting feelings, the experience of feelings, into words. And it's been studied mostly in a clinical psychology, intrapersonal, meaning an individual tactic for emotion regulation, okay? And what those studies have found is that when people label their feelings to themselves, their negative feelings to themselves, whether by journaling or even just verbalizing it in their heads, thinking it in their heads, it can help them regulate that feeling. It detaches them from that experience. It's more objective, and it starts to disrupt those action tendencies tied to negative feelings. All right. I'm a workplace scholar and I study a concept known as voice, which is speaking up with problems, concerns, work-related, task-related things to try to improve the environment, try to improve the organization, try to improve the team. And so I was also fascinated, like, wait a minute, we don't just label our feelings to ourselves, we can label our feelings to others. And what kind of impact can that have? Now, if you look within the voice research, right? Voice, employee voice, and all of you know that can be risky in and of itself, right? If I'm going to like rock the boat and speak up and challenge the team, the leader, there's fear there. You've heard probably about psychological safety and all these things. Like it's not comfortable for employees to speak words of power, whatever it is. It can be risky. So in that literature, common wisdom, common advice was like, yeah, you want to keep negative emotions out of voice, right? Voice is already risky enough. You want to like frame it, be positive or neutral, regulate your feelings, suppress those feelings, keep them out of that because that's just going to make it riskier and that's going to make managers more likely to respond more reactively, more defensively, more negatively, right? But then we're like, is there a difference between labeling feelings, like owning it? I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling anxious about this, versus the nonverbal expression. And so when we started digging into these studies that were like saying negative emotions are bad in the context of employees speaking up at work, we noticed that it was all about like tone and mood and not those verbal expressions. So Grace Simon, a doctoral student, and I were like, okay, let's look into that. And we did a series of studies where we essentially compared this nonverbal expression of negative emotions in the context of voice versus this verbalization. I'm frustrated by this issue and explain this. And we found that actually the labeling of feelings allowed employees to increase their credibility in eyes of managers and more likely for managers to follow up on those ideas and issues and those problems, which is what we call voice endorsement. So we think we're bringing this important insight, this important nuance between the different ways people communicate emotions with the labeling. And what we're finding is that there's not harm there. There actually can be a benefit. I'll pause there, but that was just one application in the context of voice, which is like trying to get your issues cared about by managers. But we think there's a whole host of other benefits of labeling, like building trust, leaders being more persuasive in some of their communication, their messages, their inspirational appeals about positive emotions, labeling positive emotions. So we're just like scratching the tip of the iceberg there, but that's one project that we're really excited about.
Yeah, wow. So verbaling our unpleasant or undesired emotions. Just quickly on that, do you refer to them as negative emotions or unpleasant? Is there a particular word that you put in front of the word emotion if it's considered unpleasant or undesired or negative?
Yeah, so we use negative and unpleasant interchangeably, but to get slightly technical, you all might have heard of like the affective or the model of core affect, which is the two dimensions, right? So there's energy level intensity is one dimension, and then the other one is valence, right? And so when we're saying unpleasant, negative, we're just saying basically on that left side of that valence dimension, and we're not nuancing as much in this paper between intensity. However, what we talk about in our future research is that there's probably differences depending on the types of emotions that people label. We started off intentionally with frustration and anxiety. Why? Because those are some of the most common emotional experiences people have in the workplace. I should say most common negative emotional experience, unpleasant. And they seem to be most commonly occurred in the context of voice when people have problems or issues that they want to raise. And so we thought that was really in line with our phenomenon. And then our third study we did in that paper, we just asked managers generally, we sampled, I think, around 500 managers, where we just asked them, hey, go back to a time where an employee verbalized, like said, I'm feeling this blank, and it was a negative emotion. We didn't constrain them. And 81% of those responses was either frustration or anxiety. Another 8% was anger. And then the remaining percent, if I'm doing my math correct, I think that's like 10 or 11%. That was just general. They just said negative, unpleasant. So it was nice to see some data back up this focus on frustration, anxiety. But to kind of play with your point, yeah, if I say things like, I'm feeling rage right now, you know, I'm feeling depressed, which are more intense versions than some of these other emotions, you may not see as much benefits. And that's something that, we or others will probably follow up on.
Yeah. Yeah. But what you're seeing though is that verbalizing those unpleasant emotions is actually productive for you, not as harmful as one might think. And so your research also talks about vulnerability, self-control, knowing more about emotions, which makes effect labeling work better. Can you
Yes.
give examples of how those particular things can help us in the workplace?
Yeah. So what Jeremy's asking is like, why do we think this affect labeling leads to higher credibility for the voicer who's speaking up with an issue and saying that they're frustrated or anxious about it, or I'm worried about it? Well, why? One is vulnerability. So there's research done on self-disclosure, and what they find there is actually sharing personal feelings is a way to build trust with another person. These are inner feelings, and what it can signal is you're not hiding anything, right? When you divulge something as personal as your feelings. And so what that tells you, the person you're sharing your feelings, is that you trust them. And then there's this reciprocal effect where then they're like, oh, well, maybe I can trust them back if they're trusting me enough to share their feelings, right? And so there's been some cool work on negotiations on what they called feelings commentators. And they found that more skilled negotiators actually verbalize their feelings more often as a tactic to build goodwill and this trust, right? Like what I'm feeling right now is a little uncomfortable. I don't think we're quite there with agreement on this issue. And they found more skilled negotiators. So that's one of this vulnerability kind of trust building mechanism. The second one is self-control. When you see someone experiencing a negative emotion, one of the concerns and worries a recipient has is whether they're in control of their feelings, whether they're even aware of them. When the person then experiencing the feeling verbalizes that, you signal, I'm aware of it, I am in control of it, right? And we think that's also a really powerful mechanism when you start to consider gender dynamics as well. Because there's this gender backlash against women where women are emotional and men have emotions. And that underlying mechanism of that is that control, is that when women tend to express negative emotions, they're often seen that it's an internal attribution given by an observer. Whereas as when men express negative emotions, it's often seen as an external factor causing that. And that's why we think this labeling can be particularly helpful for this self-control mechanism, because you're basically clarifying the source of the feeling is the issue that I'm raising. It's an external attribution, and you're signaling self-control. And so we find some evidence for that. And then the third reason why we think this affect labeling is important in being more credible is it provides further context for managers about the issue, right? So if one of your employees was like, hey, here's this problem I'm having, and then they added, and I'm really worried about it, or I'm really frustrated by it, that's signaling to a manager like, oh, okay, maybe I need to actually like take into consideration this more. Maybe I need to like, they're sharing that they're bothered by it. Like it's maybe more important, or this is a bigger problem, or there's severity there, or there's an issue there more so than if I lack that contextual information. Okay. And that comes from research on uh, the emotions as social information. And so negative emotions are often really good at like signaling problems or signaling that something needs to be fixed. And when you label that, you're sending that signal unambiguously, very clearly that there's a problem there. And so that's another effect that we hypothesize and find.
Yeah, wow. So I haven't heard the word feelings commentator before. Maybe some people when they're here today will have heard that, but is what you're saying. If we can create feelings commentators inside our teams, which is very much the work that we do, is that actually you get better insight and data and understanding of where your team or organization are at because people are expressing those unpleasant or things that might be red flags. Whereas you might not get that if you're a leader, if people are suppressing them and not verbalizing them.
Yeah, and then you're also not resolving relationship conflict either, right? When you're suppressing them and avoiding them. And look, this isn't to say that affect labeling and these types of things are going to solve all problems. No, it's creating opportunities to handle them more productively, just like a toolkit that anything is like, it can provide the opportunity to have more productive conflicts, resolve tension, get better elaboration where people feel heard and understood and issues get addressed. But it requires effort and repetition and those things that we know as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. So let's take a personal angle of this for a second. So yourself as an assistant professor at Wharton, when can you share a time or a story when you've labeled your negative, unpleasant emotions at workplace and what the outcome of that um
Yeah, for sure. It's funny is when I started getting into this project, and I think we started I guess maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I started like experimenting with my own communication. Like I'm doing the typing fingers because I would do it in emails where I'm like, I'm worried about this or I'm fresh. I started doing it more and then trying it out. And I think it can help, at least personally with me, where I think it's helped. And I would have to follow up with those people, because my perception might be biased. But I think it can be really helpful when, okay, we need to take a pause and rethink this issue. Like if I'm say like, okay, here's a potential issue with this project or the way we're arguing this hypothesis or with this data. And if I could just say that, but if I say like I'm like this is making me anxious, this is I'm really worried about this, or I'm frustrated about this, it's almost like a signal, okay, let's pause and let's double click on this and make sure that we think about it, reanalyze it, reconsider it. And so I felt like to kind of motivate the person I'm speaking with to care as much about this as I do, I find that affect labeling is helpful
Mhm.
because it's basically, and this is another sort of effect we think that might be going. We haven't explored this empirically yet, but it's taking it from just a workplace issue to also a personal concern. Okay, if that's causing that person agitation and I care about that person, then actually maybe I care more about where they're coming from and I want to sort of explore that with them. And so that's where I think it's helped in personally in some of my conversations of like, okay, Michael must really care about this. Let's like spend the time to kind of resolve this with him.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. The other
Yeah. So yeah, if I care about that person. Yeah. So we operate under like the context of teams and there might be a baseline level of care from interdependence, right? Interdependence. Now, if you don't have interdependence with someone, uh, it may not always be the best strategy to try to like voice these issues and resolve them because if it's not affecting your performance or not affecting your team's performance, then maybe it's not worth it. Maybe there's not a level of either care or dependence on each other that it's worth it for sure. So I think there's some of that too. Sorry, I just saw the question pop up and it was relevant, so I figured I would just go for it.
yeah, that's a well, it's a great segue, probably a question that's not on the list that you heard, but could you elaborate more on when's not the right time to potentially verbalize or externalize those unpleasant or negative emotions in the workplace?
Yeah. So some of my other work has looked at timing of speaking up with voice, not emotions, but like speaking up with issues. And we find what we call like strategic silence is that, in the literature, silence was seen as a negative thing. It's a symptom of fear, defensiveness, or deviance. So people are silent because they're fearful. They're silent because they want to like harm the team because they don't care, or they're silent because like there's no point of speaking up, right? And we were actually like, actually, I think people are sometimes being like strategic about this, like for functional reasons, for positive reasons. And what we found is the 3 R's of like timing. So relevance, readiness, and receptivity. So relevance is, do I think my issue is relevant to the conversation, the goals, the agenda of the team currently discussing? Readiness is, do I feel ready to pitch this? Do I have, my ducks in a row? Do I have the right framing? Do I have like thought through some of the questions I might get? The third is receptivity of the boss. So that's usually two things, like, are they in a good mood or not? And are they busy or not? Like, do they have the mental space and capacity to consider what you're saying? So I imagine those dimensions would probably also play to the emotions, right? That we're sharing, the negative emotions. Like, are they relevant to the issues at hand or are they off topic, right? Do you feel like ready to share that for whatever reason. Like sometimes it may be too strong of an emotion, and if you open up, it's not going to help you. It might further fuel that emotion and lead to a spiral that we don't want. And then the third is the receptivity of that person, right? Like if it's not a safe space, or you're for whatever reason they're too busy, that might not be the time to dive in that as well. Now, with that said, um, I still think, based on the data we have, labeling negative feelings versus expressing them non-verbally, labeling is still better, right? Like if this emotion, maybe you just can't regulate, or you just can't control it in the moment. Labeling it is based on the data we have and the theory we have, that's a better path forward than just expressing and getting upset or mad or something without the labeling. I would say the labeling would seem to be the better strategy based on the available data we have so far. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It strikes me when you talk about receptiveness of the person we're sharing it with. So it's an employee potentially thinking about sharing it with their leader or manager. We talk about it a lot in our community here that the leader must go first to invite that reciprocity from your people. So if the leader, how important it is for the leader to be expressing or verbalizing or voicing their emotions. So then the employees, the people in the team will naturally feel that there is more receptiveness.
Yes.
Be sharing those.
I think leaders can role model these disclosures, really, right? And its sense of vulnerability. And it builds off some research also done by my colleague Adam Grant, and a former PhD student who's now a professor at University of Texas, on feedback sharing. And they investigated leaders sharing feedback on themselves that they receive with their team. Now, a lot of leaders are worried about doing that because then they sort of lose credibility, or they want to seem like they're credible and competent, and they wouldn't want to share that negative information with their team members who are looking to them to lead, right? But what actually they found is when leaders do share that feedback, it builds psychological safety within the team, and they're seen as better leaders. And the way that Adam framed this, and I thought is the best way, is like, look, if you're the leader, the spotlight's on you anyway. People already know your weaknesses and flaws, and they're talking about them. So why don't you own it? And like, and share, and like, yep, I understand. I'm aware of what these are. I'm also working on them. And that create role models, that psychological safety. And so anyway, I know it's a slightly off topic, but it relates to this disclosing of feelings, where I think leaders do set the tone and can really role model some of these more vulnerable behaviors for a better effect overall.
Yeah, I heard in an interview, I listened and prepped for this. I heard you talk about this term emotional safety, which I hadn't heard
Yeah.
before, and I really loved it. And I'm assuming you're hacking psychological safety. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but could you
Yes.
tell us more about this term emotional safety and what it means?
Yes, for sure. So that's what I stumbled upon in my other research that looked at a term we called authentic emotion climate. And I know the authenticity label can sometimes uh, be mysterious and like problematic, but let me just define what we meant by that, which is that it's the shared perception among the team that uh, individual members in that team can both express what they truly feel, like emotions wise, and that others will respond to those as opposed to ignoring them or having to suppress them. And so another way to think about that is like emotional safety. And so where I came across that term was in comparison to psychological safety, which is that the risks in psychological safety were very work related in nature, right? Like asking a question and worrying about looking dumb, um, giving feedback, disagreeing with people on the team, again, about tasks and work-related things. And where I was thinking is like, I think emotional safety is like the next level up. It's like the harder level to achieve because, like, generally speaking, it's okay to talk about work, right? It's okay to like learn. Like we're working on it. It's not always okay, but that's like it's more acceptable. Whereas emotions, negative emotions in particular, well, could you argue those are work related? We have these like historical beliefs, like work needs to be rational and like we need to keep emotions out. So it's like a higher level of safety that I think requires more skill and more tools or emotional intelligence to kind of be able to achieve. And so that's what we were trying to hint at. And then in some of my other work, what we found is that teams actually can have better task-related discussions, greater creativity, more what we call information elaboration, where they share divergent viewpoints and then build upon them if they have that emotional freedom. And we studied this in particular in the context of creative teams. And if any of you involved in creative work, it's a very up and down emotional process, right? There's ambiguity, there's confusion, there's like, I'm really excited about this idea, and then someone shoots it down and you're like crushed, right? And so all of those feelings are there. And if you also have to spend resources like regulating, suppressing them, holding back, or being uncomfortable with other people's emotions in that process, then that takes away resources that you can effectively elaborate and come up with new ideas. And so that emotional freedom helps. And one really cool example of this, I was doing some work with IDEO, the design company, right? They're famous for their kind of design process, creative process. And I learned this after we did this research. So I was like, okay, that's so validating. But they actually map out the types of they have in their process of coming up with innovation. Along the time, they're like, here's where you're going to feel ambiguity and confusion. Here's where you're probably going to feel frustration and a little anxiety. They literally put them on the walls and then talked about them to not only show people that like, hey, you might have these emotions and that's okay, but then to include them in the discussions as data and information rather than try to regulate them, suppress them, or feel bad about them.
Yeah. Well, there's a few tools in our tool set that provide the opportunity to do that. If you think about an employee's journey from first day to last day, and we're on that journey, might you be feeling certain emotions, pleasant and unpleasant, and then designing for those. So how do we help people manage the undesired on their first day or even on their last day, to do that exact thing, to present opportunities to get creative and solve those moments of friction, maybe, if you think about it.
Yeah,
Great stuff.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you sort of touched on it there, I guess, in terms of how does fostering an environment where emotions can be openly shared contribute to the problem solving and creativity in teams? Can you elaborate more on what your research shows about creativity and problem solving in teams based on sharing emotions?
Yeah, so we looked at in this paper on this authentic emotion climate I was referring to, and so we did a couple experiments where we um, manipulated and randomly assigned teams to basically have a leader who was, we want to create this open environment where you're free to express the emotions you have and that we respond and we pay attention and care about rather than suppress. And then we just did the opposite, was like a professional environment. Hey, this is about work, feel free to share your thoughts and ideas but keep emotions out of it, was essentially right. And that's pretty common. Like, hey, we want your candid opinions work, but like, let's keep those emotions out of it. So it was like, had some what we call mundane realism, which is like, this exists. And we found that the teams that got the more authentic emotion climate diverged in what we call information elaboration, right? So that concept I said, diverge and integrate and build on each other's ideas better, and then ended up having greater creative ideas rated by objective raters and experts, right? And we found this also in the field as well with field data. So, we were excited about that because a lot of the research on team creativity at the time has been like, oh, you need positive emotions, or you need like a combination of positive and negative emotions. And like the evidence is actually quite equivocal at the team level. At the individual level, it's very clear. Positive emotions, good for creativity. Negative emotions, a lot of caveats. Like it depends on how you manage them, how you channel them into your work. There's a lot of depends. Positive emotions, really good for creativity at the individual. At the team level, it's more complex because guess what? If I'm feeling positive socially, we have what's called the mood maintenance hypothesis, where we don't want to disrupt someone's positive emotions. So if I think their idea is not good, but they're like expressing enthusiasm and excitement, I might like hold back my criticism because I don't want to like disrupt their positive emotion, right? So there's a lot of more complex effects when we look at the team level. And so I was really excited about this paper because what we were saying is like, okay, look, we're just going to control for the types of emotions teams members have. We control for positive, negative emotions. Now let's just create an environment where they can share, talk about, and respond to people's emotions more authentically. And that seemed to have a stronger effect in our studies and positive effect. So another way is a more simple way to say it is it might not be the kinds of emotions your teams are experiencing. It's maybe how they handle them and how they manage them and how they channel those into productive outcomes, which is a much more emotional intelligence perspective. And we tried to do that at the team level.
Yeah, well, it does remind me of an insight. I'm not sure I've quite formed it into an insight yet, but many of the people here who use the game a lot might notice this. And in my opinion, it doesn't matter so much what the team select as their top five for what they need to feel to be successful as a team or what they don't want to feel, but might from time to time. It matters that they're going through this process, that they have the chance to express these and verbalize them and chat with each other, regardless of whether it's inspired at the top and alone at the top. Those could interchange across teams, but the impact from my mind, which would be fun to begin to empirically study, and maybe one day we could do that together, but actually going through the process itself is the most powerful thing, not the emotions that people end up saying are most important to us as a team.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I'm so glad we're chatting because it seems like every thing you're doing, I have like a project on, which is very funny. But another paper that I'm working on is a concept we're calling emotional fit. And basically, what some of the basic research, like psychological research, has found is that individuals have different ideal emotions that they want to experience, right? So what that means is like someone may want to feel like calm and relaxed. Someone might want to feel very excited, enthusiastic, right? Someone may want to feel gratitude or recognition, like that matters more to them. Others might want to be pride and confident. In other words, there's a whole like long list of different positive emotions. And now I'm only talking about positive emotions, right? And if you look at the research on positive emotions, what they're kind of like is saying like, well, they all kind of do the same thing, basically. But Jeremy, what you're talking about is like, well, maybe it matters less about what the 5 emotions they select and more about the process. And I think it fits with that paper because what we're arguing is maybe what matters is not the specific emotion. What matters is if people are experiencing the specific emotions that they want to experience at work. They have different emotional preferences. They have different emotional goals, right? So to give a concrete example, if you take an introvert who is generally in an environment where they're overstimulated and they don't want to have that like rah-rah cheerleading and excitement energy that overwhelms them and that can make them feel dysregulated. Well, what matters for them is they have quiet time. What matters for them at work is if they can feel that serenity to be engaged and happy, right? And so this is I think to that point, it's a bit of a tangent, but like, yeah, let's not force people to be excited. Let's help them experience those ideal emotions that they prefer to experience in their work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that just it completely aligns with the approach we have with our game, starting with
And that's
self.
what you're doing at the team level, right? So then teams can form, okay, hey, like as a team personality, what are our preferences? And maybe we can work to manufacture those. So yeah. So I got to the connection. I did it in a little bit of roundabout way, but I got there. That's what, yeah.
So many workplaces, maybe most that some people have worked at in their lives have discouraged the expression of emotions like we've talked about. Balancing the emotional expression and professionalism is a challenge in many workplaces. What strategies can leaders employ to strike the balance more effectively?
Yeah. I think my first response would be sort of like, what is define professionalism,
Okay. Yeah.
right? Like articulate it. I think a lot of problems with not letting people express emotions becomes from a maybe traditional or archaic view of what professionalism means, right? And I think that can be harmful because uh, those values may not be widespread, they may not be shared, and it may not matter to performance, right? Because if professionalism is causing our employees to engage in emotional labor, where they're depleting resources to manage their emotions and suppress them as opposed to openly talk about them and resolve them, that may not be the best professional environment we could create for our team, right? So I think the first thing would be define and explain and like understand what professionalism means and then why that's important for the success of your team or business, right? Okay. So then, yeah, there may be certain environments where that still matters, is like this neutrality or this objectivity, even if it's just for customer impression management, whatever, that's fine. Then what the work on emotional labor has talked about is you have these on-stage environments and off-stage environments, okay? On stage, where you might need more of this professionalism and acting, maybe that's not where we have authentic discussions. Now, some companies are challenging that, even with customers. We're like, no, no, we care so much about people being candid with each other, like this radical transparency. We want those conversations with our customers. And you can be successful that way, but it just takes a different culture and mindset on that. So put that aside for a second. On stage, we have professionals. So you need to create these off stage, these backstage support mechanisms where you can have the candid, authentic conversation. So where you've seen this effectively done is in call centers, right? Especially dealing with customer complaints. There's a great podcast. I can forward it to you, Jeremy. You can send it to people. It's like 11 minute too by NPR that they did on this startup company called Spot Hero in Chicago. Where if you look at the average turnover rates of call centers in the United States, it's like 40% a year. It's like crazy. And they had zero at the time of this, 0% turnover in their call center at the time. And they did this whole work as a company to make these call center reps their heroes, that their success of this company doesn't happen without these customer service reps. And so what they did a lot of appreciation and recognition, but they also allowed recovery time. So these customers are calling and not usually to say, hey, I really appreciate your app. Thanks so much. No, it's like you double parked me. I have an interview. You made me lose this job. And like people are furious, right? And not using affect labeling either. And so then that's very draining to have to maintain your cool, get more or less abused by these customers. And so what do they say? Is like, okay, we're not going to have you need to crank out 10 calls per minute to hit your quotas to like, no, no, take the time. You have the autonomy, go to the recovery zone, go take a walk. And it's a whole culture supportive of that, right? So that's what I would say for the environments where you do have to have some professionalism or scripted in certain on-stage interactions or on-stage performances. You got to support that with backstage, off-stage recovery experiences.
Yeah, I've not heard of that term before. I really love the idea of on stage, off stage, front of stage, backstage, but also recovery spaces for
Yeah.
how you can manage your own energy or mood based on what's happening in your particular job at that time. Yeah. Yeah, wow. Let's take a slight tact here and talk about AI because I heard you mention something about AI in the workplace and it inspired me to think how do emotions well, how will emotions fit into the changing work landscape? And what advice do you have for leaders and organizations handling emotions in this new AI era that everybody seems to be so obsessed and frenzied about at the moment?
Yeah. So my hope is that we use these technological advances where AI is one of them to increase and improve the emotional capacities of employees and organizations rather than like use them to further remove emotions from the workplace, to like go back in time where we're like, we don't want emotions here, right? And let me give you examples of this. So uh, one thing separating humans and machines, at least for the time being, is what we call affective empathy, meaning that I feel the emotions of someone else, right? Now, there's pros and cons to that. The pro is that can make me really care about that person. That can make me motivated to help that person, right? Those feelings matter. Like when my daughter is very upset, I feel her pain. That's going to make me want to stop things to go help her, right? There's helpful. There's also a cost to that. It's depleting. it can also make me respond in a way that's not productive because I'm feeling that anger, or I'm feeling that frustration, or I'm feeling that, and I don't engage in the emotional intelligence. It's really hard to be then like, okay, let me validate that emotion, even though someone's getting mad at me or attacking me or saying, Daddy, I'm going to throw your hugs in the trash because I don't love you anymore. True quote from my daughter. It's hard for me to maintain that cool and be like, yes, I understand you're very upset that I brought you the blue cup as opposed to the green cup. And yes, it's totally validated that you want to throw me in the trash because of that mistake, right? That's where AI tools could be extremely effective at validating people and their experiences, because they don't care what you say to them. They're not going to get upset about it. And you could write, or you could share, and they could say, you know what I see you and feeling you is like, I think it makes sense what you're experiencing. It makes sense why you're feeling those things. And there's some research suggested of that, like before you validate someone's emotion, like they're not going to be problem focused first, right? Like you need to first make sure someone feels heard, understood. Okay, it makes sense what you're going through. Now let's try to find a solution. I think AI and tools and like the technology advances could be really good at like helping people feel heard and adding to the capabilities of humans. So not a substitute, but adding to it, right? Helping us receive emotions and deal with them more effectively. That's like one idea I think that could happen. Another is like virtual reality, where they've done these cool studies where they have people counsel themselves. I don't know if you've heard of these, right? Where they put you in a virtual reality headset and you're sitting on a couch and you see like a therapist, like Sigmund Freud or someone, like they can make it whoever. And that person like tell me what's going on, and they share what's going on. And then they pause the interaction, and then they put you in the head of the counselor, seeing yourself recorded in an avatar form, share, and they play your audio back, and then you counsel yourself. And they found some profound effects, like neurological effect, like beneficial neurological effects, but I mean, incredible. So I think there's like a lot of exciting things, and my hope is that we use these to complement these emotional intelligence capabilities, rather than like, okay, now that we have machines, we don't need humans anymore, like because they're too emotional, right? Like that would be a bad way to go, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, two things strike me there. One, um, people often say, what advice would you give yourself in this moment? But it's really difficult to do that. So having AI and the virtual reality to be able to do that easily and quickly, that is mind-blowing and fascinating. The second thing is, I wasn't expecting that at all. I love the idea that you could actually use AI from a validation perspective to make yourself feel heard. But then I wonder if the second part might be the solution piece, because for everybody here listening, the other day I ran a little experiment. I took a photo of the word defensive. So I got our cards out, put the card on the table, took a photo of it using ChatGPT, and said, can you tell me what's on this card and what I could do if I feel this consistently in my work? And it spat out a list of 8 or 9 or 10 different potential solutions. Now, they weren't all perfect, but the notion that if I'm struggling to find a solution to this thing I'm feeling right now, how that could then give me ideas to then explore for the solution, I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the second part, it's probably already like really good at that part, right?
Yeah.
Like I think the solutions, it's probably already really good at that. In my own playing around with it. So I see like where it would need to evolve is like sensing, yeah, I don't know how it would sense, but like sensing the person needs to be like heard and validated first. That's probably, what they need to work on in the to get right. Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
it's exciting.
Nice. When we first caught up via email, and you mentioned that you're doing some research at the moment on burnout and well-being at work. So, and if we had time, we were going to explore that, which we do beautifully now. So, what are some of the most intriguing findings from your current research on burnout and well-being at work?
Yeah, so I study productivity, right? So which I boil down to, how can we work better and make work better? So it's a lot about like employees taking initiative, speaking up, changing the workplace and the teams for the better. And why that's related to burnout is, you know, the one of the first ways to know that someone individually or maybe a culture has a problem is people need to be aware that someone's burned out or they're having issues, um, with well-being in the workplace. And I did this other paper where we looked at sort of a meta-analysis, which is a study of studies where you basically take a bunch of studies and you look at the correlation across like a population. So sorry if they got kind of statistical and nerdy, but it's essentially a way to aggregate evidence to look at like the association between two variables of interest. And in that study, we had burnout and we had voice, general voice, not like anything. It could be voice about well-being, it could be voice about task, whatever. And the correlation was near zero, which was fascinating to me. Because here's why. Because if you took the burnout perspective, like Maslach and all of those researchers who study burnout, it should be really strongly negatively correlated. Burnout and voice, speaking up, because you withdraw, you lack confidence and efficacy that anything is going to change. You have feelings of hopelessness. You're exhausted. Basically, all the ingredients that requires people to take initiative, take the risk of speaking up to power to change things, it should be strongly negatively correlated. So this PhD student and I were like, Marissa, who's amazing, we're like, what is going on with here? And we found this sort of paradoxical effect of burnout and speaking up about well-being, which is the following. If you're burned out, you care about issues around well-being in the workplace. It's very salient. It's very topical. You see how it's affecting you and others. It's a problem, right? And that caring, that importance of that issue is a motivating factor to be willing to speak up about this and to speak up about it. But on the other hand, that impact, that belief anything will change, that your voice matters, that it will lead to something to do, something different is negative. So you have these competing effects of burnout on speaking up about well-being. On the one hand, it increases this importance in the eyes, but on the other hand, it lowers your confidence or efficacy that anything will change. And so we summarize this sort of finding as the following, is that the people who care about well-being, the people who want to speak up about well-being can't, and the people that can don't want to, right? Because if you're engaged and you have that confidence, then you don't really care about well-being because it's not a problem to you, right? So it's this sort of double whammy, and I think it plays a different sort of angle on the traditional cultural investigations of burnout, which totally matter. But if we can't get people and employees to like talk about these issues in the first place, that's probably going to perpetuate these bad cultures and at least not give them a chance to change anything about it. So, we found that across, I think, 3 or 4 different studies, and then we were looking into some solutions. And the one that seemed to matter is what we're calling leader support for well-being, which basically takes the general leader support variables that you're probably all familiar with, and it makes it specifically about being an advocate for well-being. So it's things like, my manager allows us to take time off to recover, even if, that puts work on hold. It's really about this like prioritizing well-being over performance. And that seems to help resolve those mixed effects to get people speaking up about well-being more at work.
Yeah, wow. Have you come across any research or done it yourself about the impact of well-being on performance? Like, are you working in that particular space as well?
Yeah, I mean, I forget, I'm sure I've seen a meta-analysis. I haven't done it personally, but yeah, there's meta-analyses where like um I think the most famous one is like a 2005 or 2006. I think it's like the happiness advantage. I can send it, but it's like it's basically shows um and well-being is multifaceted, and one facet of well-being is the experience of positive emotions, positive affects. The other is a lack of negative experience, which is basically a lack of burnout, right? Those types of experiences, or even further like depressive symptoms and physical symptoms. So this meta-analysis that looked at the experience of positive emotions, it is strongly to moderately correlated with like all good outcomes in life, like life satisfaction, work satisfaction, performance across a number of studies. So yeah, there's pretty strong evidence where like, back in the day in the 70s, we'd probably have to justify why we're looking at variables like well-being and job satisfaction. We'd have to show that it leads to better performance. Today, in our journals, like we could just focus on these well-being outcomes and not have to justify why they're important because that's been established. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. If I'll share, if you can share that link, I'll share that
Yeah.
research. Yeah. So we were hoping to get some of our cards to you before this chat, so you could actually get them in your hands and have a play. They haven't arrived yet, but in your limited experience with the emotional culture deck, how do you see our game, our tool, being a valuable tool for managers and organizations?
Yeah, I mean, so the first thought that comes to mind is if any of you or anyone has ever done like relationship counseling, and my wife do it, we're great. We think of it as like working out, you gotta work on your physical fitness, you gotta work on your emotional fitness, and you gotta work on your relationship fitness. So it's like an accountability mechanism. But anytime you go to couples counselors, they give you toolkits on how to communicate better, especially when stuff hits the fan, you know? And like and then it holds you accountable to using those keywords, using timeouts, using I feel statements rather than you statements, right? Practices like mirroring. So what I hear you saying is this before just responding and like disagreeing with someone. From what I saw from your card deck, it's training people, it's giving people a tool to have these conversations around topics that people aren't very experienced or good at
Mm.
that really matter, right? And that's cool. And I think that the only way that over time in relationships at work or in personal is you need toolkits to have these more challenging conversations, especially as you're gaining experience and abilities with using them. I imagine I don't know if you would say this because you have a business to run, but like your ideal goal would be like people practice these cards so much that they don't even have to use them eventually, right? That they get that good. And I think without your tool set though, people don't even have like a vocabulary or like a starting place. And I like that it's tangible, right? It's physical and like they can actually use it. Although I'm sure you have a digital version as well. But yeah, I think that really helps. That's where I kind of go with it. So affect labeling, authentic emotion climate, emotional preferences and emotional fit. Like I mean, it's serendipitous, but like all of the things that I'm studying and saying are important. I think your toolkit is an avenue into creating those effects into the workplace.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I do like to think that people will get to the point where they don't need the cards and they've got them committed to memory and it's easy for them to roll off, or they go beyond our cards because we've got 83 odd, 87 odd emotional states or feeling states in there. I have Dr. Mark Brackett's. I'm not sure I'm certain you'll know Dr. Mark Brackett, or you might know him, his mood meter. I have that on
Mm,
the wall because I like to go even more granular than our cards, just because I've been using our cards for so many years now.
mhm.
And I was listening to Lisa Feldman Barrett and Adam Grant, actually, who
Yeah,
you're connected to.
fans
Uh,
of both, big time.
yeah, his recent podcast with her, where she talked about the emotional granularity, how important it is to get
Yes,
granular with those. And so
yes.
you can master the labels, the effect labeling with our cards. How can you go even deeper and find more specific, more granular emotion labels to describe your internal experience in the moment?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And her work is profound in that, right? Where it's like your vocabulary and understanding of emotions, it affects your experiences and your regulation of them, which is so true, right? And so I think that granularity can really be powerful for people.
Yeah, and for those people who've never had that conversation or their leaders never shown interest or an inclination in it by just introducing this as a game and giving people the labels that we have in our deck, that starts that. It's level one of an infinite number of levels you could potentially get to in life, but at least we've started that. We've invited people in to play with it and do that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of like it's one of those things like whenever whenever my wife and I like get in an argument where it's like, okay, let's use a tool set. And there's this kind of like we roll our eyes and it's like, oh, but then it's like amazing like even though when we're kind of like forcing ourselves to use it, this like emotional impact it has. Like it's like, okay, I know she's just mirroring me because she has to follow this tool. But then it's like, oh my gosh, I feel so heard right now, So it's like it's one of those like, I don't always want to work out, but I feel so much better when I do. It's definitely one of those, I imagine it's one of those kind of tool capacity building techniques.
Yeah. So we're not going to have time, unfortunately, to open the floor up, but I want to finish on this question, and that is, what impact do you hope your research will have in the short term, medium term, or long term?
Uh, I mean, the simple thing is I hope people read it. No, start, low goals. But I think the more profound one is I've found recently that a lot of my work is sort of this kind of sounds like uh, uh, like dangerous, but I don't mean it that way, like in the shadows of organization, which is I feel like there's a lot of untapped potential on concepts like emotions. And I also study silence, like people withholding. So basically, people withholding themselves from offering more value or contributions or themselves to the workplace. And so I've been really fascinated with that, especially in the last like 5, 6 years. And I think the more we can shine light onto where people are withholding and offer better ways, right? Like affect labeling as opposed to expression or suppression, strategic silence as opposed to silence, right? So I'm finding that I'm getting really interested in like uncovering these shadow areas of organizations that are impacting them, are having potentially harmful effects, and re-seeing those, giving new ways forward that people can bring themselves to work and importantly bring their contributions to the workplace as well. So uh, that's kind of a frame I've been working on. So open to feedback if you all have better ways to frame my research. But yeah, I think that's the direction I'm going. I'm excited about.
Yeah, well, how beautiful. I've not heard of that idea of uncovering the shadows within an organization, but how negative emotions, unpleasant emotions particularly shine a light on those shadows potentially, I think is a beautiful idea. And if us as a community and the people who use this game around the world can contribute to that in some way, I think we'll be really humble but proud to do that. I am unbelievably grateful and humbled and thankful for you coming in and sharing this. I was incredibly nervous and a little bit anxious this morning when I went for a coffee to prep a game because I was like, wow, you're in my mind anyway, a leading light in this space. So it has been an absolute pleasure to learn from you today. And I'm sure this will be replayed many times. I'm already thinking about going back to um, certain points in this conversation that go deeper. Um, we'll share some links in the replay of this to everybody here asking where can I find more. I'll share all of the prep that I did so you can check out all those things from Michael as well. And we're actually catching up in a couple of weeks or maybe next week to talk about
Yeah, I think we got
what
a
stuff
call.
might be,
Excited.
yeah, to be able to collaborate together. So thank you so much for generously sharing your time with us and energy with us today, Michael. Thank you to all of you who showed up and were part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And sorry I'm a little long-winded. We didn't get much Q&A, but this was awesome. And as you can tell, I get so fired up about these topics, and they're really important. So thank you all doing the good work, and keep in touch. Feel free to email me or whatever if we can continue the conversation in any capacity. So thanks, Jeremy, for the invitation, and all of you have a wonderful week and a great 2024.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. We'll see everybody soon.